Moving on to running backs now, we did kind of touch on this earlier in the show, but there feels like there's a bit of a sea change for drafters. Maybe it's just that the people drafting at this time of the year are probably involved more in the industry than people who'll be drafting in August, and ADP might change. But I mentioned that we're seeing more wide receivers in the first two rounds. We're kind of seeing some of those running backs that we thought last year should probably be in, the third, fourth, fifth round range now falling into that range. So we're seeing a kind of a adjustment to the market now. As I mentioned, that might just be the time of year that we're drafting in, but also the awareness is growing of some of the structural drafting that is talked about, not just on our show, but on numerous shows. And then, of course, the dead zone for the running backs has come to prominence over the last couple of years. So is there going to be a sea change based on the awareness of the dead zone, or are we just the people who are all drafting at this time of the year?
It is always difficult to discern that. And I don't think I have a great answer. I feel like in some regard, it depends where you're playing. If you're playing on underdog, we saw last year, I mean, Josh Jacobs going in round 7. Yeah, like the ship chasing guys ruined the running back ADPs on underdog. And we probably see something similar this year. If you were playing on FFPC, that didn't happen quite as much. And we might see something similar. But there are some guys, even on FFPC, looking early. J.K. Dobbins last year, when the offseason started, it was just absurd that he was going like middle round 2. And it was like, this is, one of the, of course, the injury was fluky. But this was one of the easiest passes process-wise before the injury. Then he started to fall to like end of round 3. And I was like, I don't know. Okay. Now he's going, beginning of round 4. And we're going to couple that with we're not as confident in the receivers in this range as we were last year. So I do think there might be more opportunities to take, Ben Gretsch calls them detours, like detours in the RB, the dead zone range in rounds 4 through 6. And if you do what I was saying earlier and take some wide receivers in rounds 1 and 2 for best ball, you probably, it's hard to go full zero RB. You're probably going to want to take some stabs at some of these guys. James Conner looks okay in that range. It still looks tough though when you get to like the 5th, 6th round, like that round 4, where some of the guys I think are falling that might have been late 2 or early mid 3 last year, and you can get them in round 4. Like those guys I seem to be interested in as it stands right now. And the opportunity cost from wide receiver isn't as high. I do get like somewhat concerned when we, start moving into 5, 6, but we'll see.
Yeah, I think the range there that like the players are kind of interesting to me are the likes of maybe an Aaron Jones, or you mentioned Dobbins there. Saquon Barkley might even start to fit into that range. There is a couple of guys of interest, James Conner as well. But how do you feel the risk reward is for those guys in round, I guess we'll say 2 through 4 maybe? There is the elite upside, but we've also seen the floor be not very positive. Shawn has written here in the show notes, below the ground as their floors. So, not very positive. But, we have seen Saquon Barkley over the last couple of years. He is battling injuries, but there is that case as well as like, it feels like these guys might be valuable in that range this year, but it might also be the case that they are really, falling off that cliff and that value will never return. So what's the risk reward for some guys like that?
Yeah, I'm generally, it's just my personality, I'm a little more focused on the reward than the risk. That's
shoot for the stars here.
That's how I play. I do think, there's an element of this, which you guys have covered a bunch, is that all running backs have a certain degree of risks. Some of it's a little bit more visible because it's already occurred to some backs than other backs. Not to say that, Saquon is as risky as somebody else. Like he's probably more risky. I'll grant you that, but it might not be to the degree that it feels or seems just based on the recent history of the players. And I do like Barkley and Aaron Jones in this range, where it's 2 guys where I think the situations have had a meaningful change. And that's when we can see a lot of the reward come through. With Barkley, the cost just dropping off immediately gives you some upside. But then the coaching change, I think there's a chance it doesn't matter that much, but there's also a chance it matters an absolute ton, going from Joe Judge and Jason Garrett, who are absolute dust balls, to Brian Dable, who led one of the best offenses in the league and helped Josh Allen develop. And if the offense goes, everybody's going to go, and we're going to be really happy with Saquon Barkley, who was, dare I say, a generational talent coming out of college. And then with Aaron Jones, I know there's some risk with Dillon behind him, but I think the offense could be centered around him a little bit more, particularly in the passing game. If you look at some of the on-off splits, use the RotoViz game splits app, the on-off with Devontae Adams, I think it's like 2 or 3 targets per game. Not a huge sample, but 2 or 3 targets per game higher. We saw him in the playoff game get utilized in the passing game when they needed him a little bit more. So I'm really excited over the pass catching role that Aaron Jones could play, where even if he splits carries, I think he's going to be efficient there. And then the passing game upside is there.
Mike, to kind of finish off the show for us here, I wanted to ask you a little bit more about Jones. That thesis that you just put out was the one that Ben and I decided to play in the Playoff 2 contest last year, and that part of it worked out great. We messed up our ownership projections on a couple of other players that if we had just gone with the default approach that we were going to take, we would have done extremely well. We did make a little bit more than our money back, but you're always thinking, man, if I just... Anyway, Aaron Jones, exactly like you're saying, and he's very, very good, which matters to me a lot at all the positions, but I think I draft running back talent more heavily or with more of an emphasis even than most other drafters. The explosiveness with that receiving ability, I mean, that's the perfect profile. But when I look at the backs just across the entire NFL, definitely the backs at the top, and you look at talent also being issued potentially behind them, it really seems like Nick Chubb and Aaron Jones are the 2 backs who have not just good players behind them, but potentially elite level starters behind them. And that shows up very clearly in their expected points per game. And then they outperform that by a pretty good amount. And it ends up with a playable point total. And because of the talent, there's a very strong likelihood that you're going to get that point total. And yet even one of the things that maybe when I think about the dead zone and why I'm not scared to take guys there, but also play a little bit differently and have for years than a lot of people, is that if I'm taking guys in rounds 3 and 4, I also want them to be able to get into that 17, 18 EP per game range, with then the possibility to add 3 or 4 points over expectation onto that, and then give you that sort of legendary type of upside. How does that work in for you? Obviously, your projections are fantastic. Your process with your projections are fantastic. And then your tactics that you use in drafts are very, very good on top of that. So you're good at using those projections there. With players like Chubb and Jones, how does that entire dynamic work through for you? I mean, obviously, there's a chance those guys get hurt, but there's the chance that they don't. What are the things that you're looking at when you're making those calls? And, Chubb and Jones aren't as expensive as some other guys as a result of some of those dynamics too.
Yeah. So I'm a little bit higher on Jones than Chubb if we look at the situations and how they're a little bit different. For Jones, again, I think that pass game role is really going to be there. And I don't really see Dillon cutting into that. And that's a pretty big deal to me, where I think that's going to give him a really nice base. And then also, if Dillon gets hurt, now we've got the EP thresholds that we want to hit. Whereas if you look at Chubb, you don't have that passing game involvement necessarily as a base. And if the guys behind him get hurt, he might need 2 injuries now. They re-signed Dearness Johnson, who was really, really good. If Hunt sticks and they've got Hunt and Dearness Johnson behind Chubb, like, you don't have that binary switch flip, which is like, okay, Hunt gets hurt, now we've got a top 5 back. Like, that's not necessarily the case anymore. So I'm a little bit more down on Chubb than Jones. Of course, format matters, like if it's full PPR, half PPR, or whatnot, because the efficiency is going to be just really good for Chubb. He is one of the guys we've struggled projecting the most the last couple of years, because he just breaks our model in terms of efficiency. But that hopefully gives some insight as like how I view their situations a little bit differently, and why I'm more worried about one than the other in terms of the risk behind them.
Did you enjoy that clip? Make sure you hit that subscribe button to get more content from RotoViz. And of course, you can check out full-length podcasts at rotoviz.com/podcast. Available on all podcast platforms. Check out our wide range of content. Once again, rotoviz.com/podcast.